What's up, everybody? In 20 minutes time, you are going to know the basics of CSS so you can go straight into creating the websites that you've always wanted to build. Let's dive into the basics of writing a CSS rule. We begin with the selector, then open up our curly brackets. Inside those brackets, we declare our property, followed by its value. For each new style, we drop down to a new line and repeat the process. Once we've added all our styles, we close the curly brackets. To target HTML elements directly, we simply type the HTML tag and add our CSS rules. For styling elements by class, we use the dot selector, as easy as that. And if we want to style an element by its HTML ID, we use the hashtag selector. Now, styling by a HTML tag is pretty generic. It applies the styles to all instances of that tag in our HTML. This is great for global styles that we want to apply universally across our web page. Remember, valid HTML only allows one ID of the same name per page, so when we style by ID, we're being very specific. It targets just one unique element. In the example on the screen, we can see how to style our header and our footer using their unique HTML ID tags. Moving on to styling by class name. For this, we use the dot selector followed by the class name. Styling by class is super common because it's versatile and very reusable. Multiple HTML elements can share the same class, so our styles will target all those elements with just one rule. We can also combine selectors for more specific targeting. For instance, we can style elements that have both classes by chaining our class selectors together. On the right, you can see how we mix a HTML tag with a class. This style applies specifically to H1 elements that also have the class of main heading. Here's another example, chaining an ID and a class selector. Note that the element must have both the ID and the class name for this style to apply. The bottom example shows how we can chain an ID with two class names. Targeting elements through their parent is a really powerful and useful technique. Notice the space between the selectors here. This tells our styles to look for the element with the ID of main heading and then find its child element that is a H1 tag. Now, let's get into some more advanced selectors. We can apply the same styles to multiple elements at once by separating the selectors with a comma. In the example shown, we're applying the same CSS rules to three elements: the H1 tag, the P tag with the class name paragraph text, and the span with the ID of span text. We can also target what's known as pseudo selectors. These allow us to style elements based on this state, like hover or focus, or even based on attributes. For example, you can see here how we style a button when it's both disabled and hovered over. Now, before we jump into some code, let's quickly look at how to include styles in our web apps. There are three options. Option 1 is Inline Styles. We write the styles directly in the HTML elements themselves. Option 2 is Internal Styles, by placing our CSS within a style tag that's within the HTML file. And option 3 is using an external style sheet, creating a separate .css file that contains all of our styles and linking it to our HTML using the link tag, as shown on the screen. This is the most common and best practice, as it keeps our CSS and our HTML separate and keeps our code clean. Okay, so we're going to start off here nice and basic, and we're just going to set some inline styles as we talked about. So all we do is write the style tag on the element, and we write our CSS directly onto the element itself within the HTML. So let's change our font color here to red, and let's make the text a little larger. We'll change it to 32 pixels and save that. And as you can see, our text is now red and 32 pixels. Okay, moving on, and the next option we had to write styles was within a style tag in the HTML. So we can do that within the head here, and all we do is we open up our style tag, we close that and drop down, and now anything we write in here can be CSS. So what I'll do is I'll target the H1 element, and again we'll set the color to red and the font size to 32 pixels and save that. And as you can see, our text has changed again. The third way and the best way that we can write styles is in a separate style sheet. This allows us to keep our HTML and our CSS separate and keeps the code much cleaner. So this is how I would recommend you write your styles. To link to a separate style sheet, we use the link tag and we give it a rel attribute, and we tell our HTML that this is a style sheet, and then we give it the href attribute, which tells our HTML where our style sheet lives. So for us, I have a styles.css file that lives in the same place, as you can see here, as our index HTML. Okay, before we move on to any more code, I just want to quickly show you something. So if we right click on the browser here and click Inspect, this will open up our dev tools. I am using Google Chrome, by the way. And if we hover over this H1 here, this shows us our markup. And what you can see on the right hand side is the orange bars. Those orange bars represent margin. So I know that we haven't added any margin to this H1, so where is this coming from? By default, browsers will apply their own default styles to elements. So for example, you can see here that this H1 is assigned some margin here, some margin here, and it also has a default font size. We can tell that this is coming from the browser because there's a user agent style sheet, little italic text here. This indicates that these are default browser styles. So if you're ever wondering, why does my element not quite look right, it may be because there's some default styles being applied there. Okay, moving on. So we can close these dev tools now, close that down. And if you remember right, we linked to our external style sheet here. So that means we can now start writing styles in our style sheet. So what we'll do first is we'll target the H1 element again. And this time we'll give it a blue font, and we'll change the font size to be a little bigger, to 48 pixels, and we can save that. And you can see on the right hand side that this has changed our H1 element. Okay, so if we flick back to our markup, and you can see that we've got this H1, but it also has this ID of welcome message. So let's try and style it by its ID. So if we go hashtag for the ID selector and we say welcome dash message, we open our curly brackets and let's give it some underline. So we say text decoration underline and we save that. And as you can see, we're now styling it by the ID tag. Right, so let's flick back to our markup a second. And down here you can see we got these two buttons and they both have a class of .btn. So what we're going to do now is style these buttons, and if we do this by the class selector, which is .btn, so remember we use the dot selector for classes, and we drop that down, and let's give it a background color of green. We'll also make the font color white, and we'll make it bold too. We save that, and as you can see, I've got some really pretty buttons on the right hand side, and because they've both got that class of .btn, we've managed to style both of them with one rule. So that is what I was talking about earlier, where class selectors are really handy because we can style multiple elements and just apply this class to every element that we want those styles to apply to. Okay, cracking on. If we go back to our markup again, and we can see that our p tag here has this class of paragraph text, and so does our span here. Well, so how could we style this using its class, but not this at the same time? Well, what we can do is we can actually target the HTML tag of p, and we can say only the p tags that have a class of paragraph text. And let's say we want to change the color to red and save that. And as you can see now on the right hand side, the text here has changed, but the span, which is this, where is it? Please click the button, has not changed. And that is because we're styling by class still, but we're only styling the p element with the class of this. Cool. So let's start to change some selectors together. So what do we got? Okay, this H1, we've got an ID of welcome message and a class of main welcome. So what can we do here? If we want it to be really specific, we could go hashtag welcome message and target that ID. And then we can also say, what was the class name again? Main welcome. So we can say and chain on the class name of main welcome, drop that down. What do we want to do? Let's just overwrite what we've got currently, and we'll change the color to be yellow to make my nice pretty website over here. And as you can see, we're now yellow text, and what we're doing here is we're chaining selectors, and this is more specific to the color that we've got up here for this H1. So it actually overrides the blue, and we're going yellow. Okay, let's show the power of using parent selectors. So I'm going to flick back to my HTML here, and outside of this section I'm going to put another button, and no class, we'll just say click me a third time, save that, and you can see we've got this other button here. So what we're going to do is we're going to style all buttons that live within this hero section by using a parent selector. So to do that, we go back to our styles and we say the hero class and all buttons that live inside that. So what we're saying here, we're targeting the class name of hero, and then we're saying all children of type button that live in this hero section. And what do we want to do? Let's change the font size to be 48 pixels, and we'll save that. And as you can see, our gigantic buttons have changed, but only these two here that live within the hero section. And that is because we're styling by the parent selector and then the buttons within that. It's actually really good. If I hover here, you can kind of see. So element class hero, and then the buttons that live within that. Okay, so let's move on and keep creating our beautiful website that we've got over here. So if I go back to our HTML again, and what we're going to show now is targeting multiple elements at the same time. So what we can do is we'll target the H1, the P, and the span, all with one rule. So how do we do that? So we say H1, comma, P tags, comma, and span tags. And we're going to apply the same rule to all of these. So what can we do? Let's set the font weight to be bold. And save that. And you can see all our fonts went bold here. What I'll do to highlight this a bit better is we'll change the style to be italic as well. There we go. So you can see our H1 here, our P tags, and our span tag, they've all been changed by this one rule. So that's how we can target multiple selectors with one style. Okay, so next thing I want to show you is how we can use pseudo selectors. To do that, what we'll do is we'll target the button, and pseudo selector, we type colon, and for this one we're going to do on hover. So on hover, we want to change the background color of all our buttons with the button class to purple. And if I save that, so if you remember right, we didn't put the class of BTN on this bottom button, but we do have that class on the other two buttons, the green ones. So when I hover over this now, you'll see that our background color changes to purple. Another pseudo selector we could use, if we change this button here, actually if we add it to this one, and we say that this button is disabled, and what we can do is we can target that, so we can say all our BTN classes and the disabled selector. I want to target that, and for those I want to change the background color to be gray and save that. Okay, why hasn't that worked? BTN, that'll be my spelling. There we go. So you can see that this disabled button is now gray, and we're targeting that HTML attribute that we've got here. Again, VS Code gives us a nice little overlook of that here. So element, and you can see that we're targeting any button that has the disabled attribute. Okay, so the last thing I really want to show you here is called the CSS Box Model. And understanding this will really give you a grasp on how everything really fits together in CSS. So to teach you that, what I'm going to do for now is just remove all our styles and remove all of our HTML as well. So I want to keep that main tag. And here I'm just going to create a div with a class of box. Save that, and you can see on the right hand side we've got nothing there at the moment. I'm going to style that box. Don't worry so much about the styles I'm writing currently. This is more just to give you an understanding of the CSS box model. So we're going to give it a width and a height. We're also going to give a border of 10 pixels. And we want to give it some padding of 20 pixels and some margin here as well of 20 pixels. And we're going to save that. Okay, now we've created this box, what I want to do is open up my dev tools here, and we're going to click on this box that we've created, and I'm really going to illustrate how the CSS box model works here. So over on the right hand side here, we've got this illustration in DevTools, which really helps visualize this. So inside in the blue, we've got what starts as the content of our box, which we set to be 100 pixels. So you can see that there in blue. So we've got 100 pixels by 100 pixels is the content of our box. Next comes the padding. So we've got 20 pixels of padding, which we added in our CSS. That's highlighted by the green here. Next, we've got the border, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's the border around the element. We set that within our CSS to be 10 pixels. And on the outside here, we've got margin, highlighted by the orange color, which we set to be 20 pixels. So you can see we've got 20 pixels all the way around. What actually are these values? Well, let's start with the content. This is pretty self-explanatory, as I've already said. This will be the actual content of your element. So if you had some text in here, that would be the text, or right now it's just nothing, and we've created the content to have a width of 100 pixels and a height of 100 pixels. So that's highlighted by the blue. Padding, green. So that is spacing between the content and the border of your element. And what I can do to really show you this, actually, if I give this box a background color of, let's just say red for now, and I open my DevTools back up, this is really highlighted how the padding is the space between the content and the border, and we can see that because the red outline actually fills the padding itself. So you'd use this if you want spacing between the border and the content of your element. Moving on to the border, as I've said, pretty self-explanatory. We've already set this border within the CSS to be 10 pixels, so this just illustrates that. Then moving on to the margin. So margin you would define as the spacing on the outside of the element after the border. So you would usually use this if you want to space it in terms of, or space it relative to another item. So let me show you what I mean by that. So if we go back to our HTML here and we just add a p tag and we just say some text and we save that. So we got some text, and what I'm going to do here is just remove the margin, because remember earlier we said the browser gives default styles. Well, on a p tag it gives margin by default. So we're going to turn that off, and this will allow me to open up my DevTools again and really show you what I mean by the margin here. So you can see we've got 20 pixels highlighted in orange on the outside all the way around our box. This is quite nice because you can see here now how that spacing is applied between that element and the p tag here. So you can really see that here. And that about wraps it up. Let me know in the comments if you learned something from this video and what other topics you'd like me to cover. Please like the video if you enjoyed it and learned something, and consider subscribing, as I'll be creating much more content like this. Thanks for watching.